Hell's Kitchen villains. Hell's Kitchen chefs are villains. Villains that are chefs. And many more ways I could drag out this intro. Hell's Kitchen is a show that doesn't need any introduction. Starting all the way back in 2005, Hell's Kitchen is one of the most unique cooking shows out there. Not just for its host being an angry Scotsman who most people know as being unable to find one specific sauce, not just for the show being much harsher than several other cooking shows at the time, but also because of the personalities that appear. Especially the villains. I think Hell's Kitchen villains are underappreciated. Like, really underappreciated. I know this sounds incredibly weird for me to say without context, but I do think that villains in Hell's Kitchen are important to making a genuinely good season. I mean, take season 20 for example. Yeah, the cast is all chill and sunshine and rainbows, but I think I'd rather have people get into screaming matches than have the red team talk about feet. What I'm saying is that villains, for all the shit they get from fans, do belong in Hell's Kitchen because they bring a sort of extra entertainment value. But what makes one? What makes a Hell's Kitchen villain stand out among other antagonistic chefs? What makes a genuinely incredible villain? That's the question I want to answer today, because I feel like Hell's Kitchen villains have always been a really interesting aspect of the show for a variety of reasons. Now before I get any further, I do want to make the disclaimer that this video is entirely subjective. You'll probably have some different viewpoints on what makes a good villain, and you're more than free to disagree with my takes. Hell, even I disagree with a lot of my own takes. I made my takes about a month ago. That of course means that there may be spoilers for future seasons I talk about. But at the same time, I change my opinions a lot, so yeah. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into the 3 traits into what I think makes a good Hell's Kitchen villain.
Interest.
I feel this goes without saying for really any villain in media, but what I say is one of the most important aspects of a Hell's Kitchen villain is being interesting. And I'm not just talking about being interesting in a way that you want to see them fail, I'm talking about being interesting in a way that you actually give a shit about what they're doing. I think some of the best examples of this come from season 7. While season 7 is definitely far from my favorite season, I'll be honest, the main villains of the season in Scott and Benjamin are honestly really good. Scott's extremely arrogant and yet so ineffectual, it's hilarious, and Benjamin started good and likable, but gradually started to let his ego get in the way while still remaining a pretty consistent threat. Take notes, Russell. Also help with the latter's case that he's the most interesting chef in the final 4. Fight me on this and lose. That being said, an uninteresting villain can not only stick out like a sore thumb and make you really dislike them, and not in a fun way, but honestly the worst it can be is not really feeling like a villain. I know it sounds weird to say, but when you see a chef like Andy from season 6 for example make it to the top 8, even though he realistically should have been gone a while ago, you're trying to wonder on how he made this far into the competition. Some could say a lucky break. Me, I feel the season tried to make him into the main antagonistic force on the blue team, only this fails for 2 reasons. 1, Andy's personality is so basic you can neutralize industrial grade acid with his spit alone, and 2, Andy's rival Robert, as much as I hate to say it, would have made infinitely more sense as the main antagonistic force on the blue team. Andy just does not have the capability to be a villain, and it's why I really struggled to classify him as one. And then there's who I feel is among the worst villains in the show's history, Aaron, Santos, and Steve from season 13. Granted, they do succeed a little bit over Andy because they at the very least do something interesting with their alliance, but at the same time the most they accomplish is getting JR eliminated, who wasn't even that good, and even then, one of their own is nominated regardless. It's at best a Pyrrhic victory from 3 chefs who have the personality of skim milk. An engaging personality is what I think makes a good villain. A villain with no personality, or just a rather boring villain, makes the chef not only unlikable in a not fun way, but also results in the chef feeling like they're not a villain at all when the narrative feels that way.
Moderation.
Moderation primarily refers to the run of a villain based not only on their skill, but also their screen time. Now look, I understand that villains are pretty much guaranteed to make it far into the season, so I do expect them to get a lot of screen time. What I mean is that these villains have to be moderated to ensure they stay in the love to hate category, otherwise, well, let me explain 2 possible scenarios. Scenario 1, the villain makes it further than they should. This is the most common ways I've seen villains gain hatred, and personally, I think it's the least egregious of the two. One of the ways a villain works is that anticipation for their downfall. Sure, they might survive over a few chefs, but more often than not, those chefs will not be that good in the first place or be going on a spiral. So usually that means their elimination will make some level of sense. I think caution does have to be used, however, if a villain is going to survive over a chef that will result in obviously bullshit elimination, because I feel doing that way too often is just going to drag down the season as a whole and will make Ramsey's cause look a lot more questionable, especially if the villain starts to happen before the top 10. I mean, come on, I can bring up Tiffany's like a 9 plea and you get what I mean. It's more annoying than anything, and not in a fun way. Scenario 2, the villain gets a lot of screen time. Okay, this is something that mainly applies to one chef that is quite literally right around the corner, but watch them makes me really appreciate the importance of screen time, because I feel what makes a good villain and not a grating villain is how much focus they get. Again, I understand that a villain is going to get a fair amount of screen time. It's only natural, so it sounds like I'm bitching for the sake of bitching. But picture this. Imagine if someone like Russell got, I don't know, 185 confessionals in his season. Not only would that mean we miss out on several opportunities to learn about other chefs and give a shit about them, like Boris's pleasantness and Trev's antics when he isn't planning on committing murder, but a large chunk of the season would just be hammering into our skulls with the subtlety of a brick through a window that Russell is an asshole. And I'm not gonna lie, I think the season would be so much worse if that were the case, even with Raj's antics. Actually, if that were to happen, then I think Raj's antics would be toned down, and that would be a hell of a lot worse. Combine both scenarios together and you'll end up with a villain that you just want to have get off your screen, and eventually not become fun to root against.
Outcome.
I think out of all the traits that are shared between each Hell's Kitchen villain, their outcome is ultimately what the show is the most successful at, and probably the most important aspect of a villain. Like, you could have a villain that makes it further than they really should, and yeah, that's annoying on its own, but their elimination that follows it up is often really satisfying, and I feel often results in some of the show's best moments. Mark, Scott Lee, Jason, Johnny, all of whom let Villain Mania run wild, got eliminated in some of the most satisfying eliminations, even if they should have been gone a bit earlier. But for as much as the show handles villain eliminations well, there are a few exceptions to this rule. Okay, there's only one exception to this. That's Elise. I mean, hot take and spoiler alert for the next season, but I really don't think her elimination was that satisfying. I mean, we're expecting someone like Elise, the big bad, hell, the most in-your-face, clearest day sledgehammer fired out of a cannon put on top of a bazooka, obvious big bad in the show's history to get an elimination worthy of a villain like her. Something that makes Shakespeare roll in his grave and think, damn, why didn't I think of that? Before realizing the reason he can't is because he's been dead for over 200 years. But nope, she just gets nothing but praise and her jacket kept. Sure, it makes sense in terms of placement, but for me it just feels like I got the Hell's Kitchen version of cucked. If there is any way a villain should go out, I really feel they shouldn't go out on a positive note. Like, at all. Yes, I know that on occasion that's going to be the case, and for what it's worth, I'm okay with how Benjamin went out in Season 7, but that's only because Benjamin earned his spot. While Elise, well, I should save it for Season 9. Oh, trust me, I'll have a lot to talk about with her. Also, this would be the point where I talk about Ariel's Season 15 win, because I've seen a lot of people label her as a villain winner, and honestly, I think both the music and the comment section mainly talking about Nino sums it up perfectly. So to sum up, what do I think makes a good Hell's Kitchen villain? It's really up to your interpretation. I know it's kind of a cop-out to have me ramble on about what I think makes a good villain and then say it's mainly up to everyone else on what makes a good villain, but the thing is that I feel that's the truth. I think Jen is a good villain much of the same way that I think someone like Russell is not a good villain, and people may think the opposite of that and think Russell is great while Jen is complete dog shit. And you know what? That's okay. I'm not the guy who says what makes and doesn't make a good villain. I'm just an idiot who cosplays as an opossum and makes silly ranking videos. This is just a bit of fun. But anyway, whether or not you agree with what I think makes a good Hell's Kitchen villain, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. EternalOpossum, out.